Well, we're back again. Witchcraft hates for me to talk about them this way. They better get used to it, because I'm not done yet. I'm not going to be done until witchcraft is driven completely out of the communities of faith. Totally. Now, I'm not going to stop until they're gone. Well, we just asked God to be with us and to feed us and teach us, give us living water. So therefore, we just say, Father, we are happy to be here to serve you. And we pray all of our prayers in the name of Yeshua the Messiah. And everyone says, Amen. Baruch Hashem. You may be seated. If you're not, just seat anyway. If you can't, then stand. We're starting off in Leviticus chapter 25, beginning in verse 1. Vaydaber Yahweh el Moshe Behar Sinai lemor. The word of Yahweh unto Moses in Mount Sinai, saying, Daber el Bnei Yisrael, ve'marta Elohim, ki tavo el haaretz asher ani noten lechem, v'shabbat haaretz Shabbat LeYahweh. Now I'll read it in English for you. Let's go back up one verse. The word of the Lord came to Moses in Mount Sinai, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say you unto them, when you come to the land which I gave to you, then shall keep the land a Shabbat LeYahweh, to Yahweh. What is Shabbat? What does it mean?
It's peace. It's the form of Shalom as we rehearse this return. It's a high holy day. It's when you
Okay.
from his creation.
It's a rehearsal. The weekly Sabbath rehearses something a little different than the annual Mikra, the
Annual high
assemblies,
holy
yeah.
days, melody.
Moedim.
The Moedim, the appointments.
Yeah, the appointed times.
So we have the weekly Shabbat. It's an every week thing. And then we have the annual holy days, the Moedim, M-O-A-D-I-M. So Moedim are the appointments of God that he has made with us even from the foundation of the earth. And when we come together on these things, we're rehearsing different aspects of the age to come. So, what does the weekly Sabbath rehearse? Can somebody guess?
The age to come.
It is the age to come, but what about Shabbat is pictorial of the age to come?
It's rest. We're not working.
Okay.
We're not doing normal things of this earth. We're focused on the spiritual, our time with our Heavenly Father.
Right. So, what is Shabbat?
Shabbat is rest.
Shabbat is rest. It literally means to stop working. So Shabbat is the act of stopping your work. So, does anybody know another Hebrew word for rest?
Shalom is a form
Noach.
of rest, isn't it? That's
Not really.
okay.
But there is a word that you know that you don't remember probably that means rest. Noach. Noach. A-C-H. N-O-A-C-H. Noach literally is a Hebrew word that means rest. Now, what was the world resting from when God instructed Noah to build a big boat?
What was
What were they supposed to be resting from that they hadn't been resting from?
Well, there was so much wickedness.
Hamas.
Evil, yeah. Lawlessness.
Hamas. Chamas. Hamas. And Hamas literally means evil. That all men had strayed in their way and turned away from God and his laws. And that they were corrupted. And every man was stealing from his brother everything he could get his hands on. It was wicked times. And Noah was the one who was to bring rest to the earth. Rest from what? From the evil.
Yeah, the wickedness, yeah.
So we're going to see the wicked diminished and the righteous exalted, and God will choose 8 souls to go on that boat. And these are the ones that he will save the whole world through their offspring. So he says, when you come, ki tavo, when you come. You see that lit up there on the screen? See that?
Mm-hmm.
Ki tavo. 2 words. Ki means as or like or when. Tavo, tavu, when you come. Tavo. You come unto the land which I give unto you all. He was from Texas. He's a southerner. You thought probably that Texas is the only place you'd ever hear y'all.
Yeah.
But it's all over the Bible. I think God was from Texas. Then shall keep. Okay. Shabbat is a complete form of the verb to rest. But you put the vav in front of it, and here's the vav. I've got it highlighted there. You see it? It looks like an old man's cane, actually, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
But it actually means shepherd's staff. It's got a little bit of a hook on the end, and that's what you use to rescue your lambs when they fall in the water. So, and when this is at the beginning of a verb, it changes the complete or incomplete nature of the word, of the verb. Verbs show action. So this is either looking at action that has already taken place, or it's looking at action that's soon to take place, or will one day take place. So Vishabbat here literally means and then you shall, at that time, I guess, when the conditions are met, you will Shabbat. And here it's talking about the land. Vishabbat, Shabbatah. This is a word about the feminine nature of Hebrew verbs and nouns. Shabbat is a masculine form, but when you see the ah and the hey on the end of it,
Oh, yeah.
that makes it feminine. So when then she shall rest. And who is she that's going to rest?
The land.
Haaretz, the land. The land will rest. Shabbat, it will Shabbat. Shabbat la Yahweh. It'll have a complete, instead of it being in violence, the land turned to Yahweh. Because it was forced to go away from Yahweh, by all those who were full of violence. Okay. Okay. Anytime now. I think I'm going to close this one out. And we'll open it up again. Okay, so now we'll come back to the Bible that I like to use for my classes, and we'll bring it back up again. Okay, here we go again. So once you come into the land, he says, you're going to have some rule changes that are going to apply to the land. Shesh shanim. Shesh means 6. Shanim means years. And yes.
She has a question.
Okay.
So she wants to know, when we talk in calendar days, are using any cardinal?
Well, let's go ahead and get into the calendar. Let's just do that. Okay. When the children of Israel left Egypt, right at that first Passover, where they were celebrating Passover in the land, God told Moses, this shall be the beginning of months for you. This is the first month of the year. It's the springtime. Now, the pagans also celebrated springtime. And they did it with spring fertility goddesses and sexual orgies and everything you can think of that was contrary to God's word. But God wanted his people to keep things his way. And so he brought them out in the first month, and he was going to set that as the beginning of his calendar. So his calendar begins with the spring. Then, did you have another comment or question?
Yeah, calendar, Roman calendar.
Well, it's not the Roman calendar, it's the biblical calendar. And the biblical calendar starts in the spring. So the first month, okay, the Roman calendar starts January, February, March. And so March is usually the beginning of the springtime.
And that's Roman calendar.
And God gives us ways to know when it's the first month and when it's not the first month. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But we have January, February, March. That's the end of the old pagan calendar way of counting months. So March would have been, essentially February was the last month of the pagan calendar. And when Augustine came into power, he didn't like it that the month that was named after him was shorter than the rest of the months. So he stole a day from February and put it on his month. And that's why February has 28 days and only in a leap year 29. So he was full of his pride and arrogance, made his month equal to the longest months in the calendar. And when they finally adjusted the calendar to correct for all the lost days and the leap years and things, it created such chaos in the people that it was like pandemonium. It was like, what day is it? They chopped 15, I believe it was 15 days. I've got it in a report that I wrote on all this, and it's available online. But it was like they added 15 days to their calendar because it had drifted off too far. 15 days they added in. So they had a huge problem in keeping track of calendar time because they were using strictly a solar calendar and not the lunar calendar. So when they got it all adjusted, then they got it to where they were adding the right number of days in at the right time, so it stayed fairly close to, so that the seasons would stay in their place. When God gave us the calendar, it was a biblical calendar. It wasn't a lunar calendar. It wasn't a solar calendar, but it was God's calendar. And he gave us months that had either 30 or 31 days on every month. During a leap year, when they had to adjust the calendar, because I'll tell you how they did that too, and you'll think that's pretty cool when we get through. But when they had to adjust the calendar, they would add a whole nother month in there. It's called a leap month, because that's just the way the calendar works when you're using the God's holy day calendar. And when they added a second month, it would be called Adar 2. You got Adar 1, Adar 2. And so the month of Adar is where they always added the leap month in to correct the calendar for the drifting. How would they know when to do that? Well, they at the first month of the calendar is only time when you can do that. And they actually checked the barley harvest to see if it was in the month of Aviv. Aviv is the state of the barley when it's developing its head in the stalk, that if you smash it between your two thumbnails and look at it, it comes out about the consistency of thick toothpaste. Okay? Like thick cream cheese, something like that. And so if it doesn't do that by the 15th day of the first month, then they add the extra month in. A leap month is inserted, because the crops have to be in a ready state in order to celebrate Passover and to log the rest of the holy days that are coming throughout the rest of the year. Keeps everything in order. That makes the calendar line up with God's grace given to us for the harvest. You don't get a harvest until the grains reaches the Aviv state. Once it reaches the Aviv state, then you're ready to look for the time for the first harvest, the early harvest of the year. Let's see where we can go from here. How do we know it's reached the Aviv state? We have people all over the land of Israel who are watching the barley harvest. And in every synagogue, in every city, they didn't actually call them synagogues back then, because that's a Greek term, and Israel was reluctant to accept Greek terms early on. But it was really called Beis Knesset, the house of judgment. And so each city had a little house of judgment. It consisted of a minimum of 3 judges who would sit and hear cases brought to them by the people. Among those cases would be, well, when is the first of the month? And when is the first month begin? And so they would have witnesses who would be called to go with the people who claimed to have found the beef state in the barley harvest. And they would go with them, and they would confirm the witnesses' reports. So if they found one or two people in a city, then they would send these one or two people to Jerusalem as witnesses. And they would do this from all over the land of Israel. The earliest records on this comes from the house of Hillel, who was the last priest who stood in Israel for God, the high priest. And he would we also had something called, in today's terms, the brain's not working. Okay. I started to say Septuagint, but that's the Old Testament written in Greek. But it was the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was the high court of Israel. The high priest was over the Sanhedrin. So these witnesses would converge on Jerusalem, and they would be tested by the high court. And they would discover, number one, can these people really see? Because they have to see a very tiny sliver of the moon when it's in its new moon state. You can't hardly see it. It's very thin. And then the next day it's still very thin, but it's starting to go the other direction now. And so he would do something like, okay, how many fingers am I holding up? How many am I holding up?
2.
2?
1.
That's a thumb.
Oh. Oh, okay, I see it.
Anyway, I'm playing with your mind here.
Yeah, for real.
But anyway, he would say, how many fingers am I holding up? And so they'd say, 1. And you go, nope, disqualified.
Oh my gosh.
He would also ask them if he has any family members who are in business that could profit by the appearance of the new moon. Because there were some financial things that were in the land of Israel that could cause people to have a gain or an advantage over other people by claiming to have seen the new moon, and maybe they didn't really see it, but they claimed it, and so they could end up with some kind of an advantage over other people. So these things were all tested by the Supreme Court. And then once the Supreme Court determined that there were 2 people, at least 2 people, 2 witnesses who were qualified to be witnesses. They had to be able to see. They couldn't have 2 people from the same family come in and witness the moon, because they might make the family have an advantage. So they were very careful in trying to pick fairly people who were true witnesses. And these 2 then would go before Hillel, who was the final high priest in that time. And again, he would ask them these questions, and then he would say, when you saw the moon and the 3 stars near the moon, where were they? Can you show me on this chart where they appeared? Well, why is that important? Well, he wants to know that they really saw, so that he knows where they're supposed to be, but he wants to know that they actually saw them where they were supposed to be. And if they said someplace other than where they were supposed to be, he'd say disqualified. And so if they didn't find anybody that saw the stars in the right position, then they'd wait until the next month or whatever, okay? So that's the way the first month and the new moon was verified. When they found 2 valid witnesses that actually did see the new moon, then they would send up, well, from what I read in the Talmud, the Sanhedrin would send 2 representatives out on the back porch of the Sanhedrin's meeting hall, and they would holler up to the Temple Mount where the high priests were waiting, and they would say, "My Lord, the high priest, we have 2 witnesses." Where have you heard that before? How about Revelations? At the mouth of 2 witnesses, right? Know about the 2 witnesses? Well, that's what that's all about. And so anyway, the high priest would call out, "Send them forth." And they would send the 2 witnesses forward, and they would go up to the Temple Mount, and then they would begin to be questioned by the high priest to once again verify that they actually did see it. And then once they have confirmed through all the testings and things that they have, that they know how to verify these things, then the high priest would call forth the captain of the honor guard of the priesthood, who would come up, and he says, confirm the new month, confirm the new moon. And so he would sound the shofar, and then the people up on the mountains would hear the shofar, and they would take bonfires that are up on platforms, up on the mountains, and they would light them, and they would burn. And when the next mountain over saw the fires burning, they would light one, and it would go around the world that way. I mean, all the way to Babylon, where there was a great diaspora of Jewish folks there, and they needed to know when it was too. And so they signal with signal fires that the new months have been sanctified by the priest. This priest is the only one who could sanctify it. So, any questions at this point? I have one.
Yes.
Why is Shane so peaceful?
In the Rocky. She had one. Does a Hebrew calendar exist?
I'm sorry?
Does a Hebrew calendar exist? Does a Hebrew calendar exist?
Does one exist? Yeah. I got one hanging on the wall in there. It's a Hebrew calendar. You've got one there. That's a Hebrew calendar. So what do you think the problem is? See, I'm getting ready to talk about this. You're going to find it's very hard to stump the rabbi.
September?
September is when Rosh Hashanah happens. But Rosh Hashanah isn't the biblical beginning of months.
Does a Hebrew calendar exist? Oh, ends in September.
Well, yeah, but it ends in September and it begins in September.
Yeah,
But none of the months up until the first month are counted. The first day of counting of the months is the springtime.
That's when the
Okay.
Jewish calendar starts.
But there are other yearly cycles as well. Like, for example, there's a new year for the birthing of the sprouting of trees, because they sprout at a different time than the other crops do. And then there are other things that they do too in such same manner. Now, I've got an article online that's called the calendar, the biblical calendar, that you might find, well, more than might, you will find it very interesting. I'm going to see if I can find that here real quick. I'm looking for the one that says, Why Zion? FAQ right here. On the home page, you look for the FAQs, and then you click on the top. There's a one marked calendars, and I got a very in-depth look at calendars of the biblical times.
What does Zion stand for?
Huh?
She's asking, what does Zion stand for?
Zion is an alternate name for the city of Jerusalem. Yeah. Anyway, Zion is called also the city of David. So.
And God's holy city. It's also called God's holy city.
Rabbi?
But it talks about all kinds of things about that. Yes?
Would it be a little advantageous to kind of distinguish between the civil calendar and the actual spiritual calendar?
Right. There is a civil calendar as well. It has its
Yeah.
own New Year. And that's the one that's the Feast of Trumpets, is the civil New Year. But anyway, there's just lots and lots of information on this website talking about how some of the pagan celebrations were added into the Christian calendar and so on. So lots of information there. So I would recommend that you go to Zion, tzIon.org, and click on FAQ, and then from there you can find the link to the calendars.
What do you think about rebuilding the third temple?
That'd be a lot of work. I don't think I can do it.
Yeah, that'd be huge.
That would be a tough one. But I'll certainly root for those that are doing it. Come on, let's get it built. Was that about as much of a non-answer as I can give you? Yeah. Well, anyway, there's a lot more to this. If you'll read the article I wrote on calendars, it'll answer a lot of your questions. So anyway, in verse 5 again, or 3, I guess. 6 years you shall sow your field, and 6 years you shall prune your vineyard, and gather in the fruit thereof. But in the year Hashivi'i, the 7th year, it will be a Sabbath of rest, and it will be for the land a Sabbath unto Yahweh. Your field you shall not sow, and your vineyard or prune, because that would be breaking the land's commanded rest. Safiach. Safiach. Safiach is a word that means basically plants that grow up of their own accord without having to be resown. Okay? And it says, Sapiach Katsirach that which is grows of its own accord, you shall not reap it, neither the grapes of the vine that's undressed, neither gather a year of rest. It is a rest unto a complete mandatory rest unto Yahweh. My computer is arguing with me. That which grows of its own, of your harvest, you shall not reap it. Let's go down to the next verse. It shall be a Sabbath for the land, for you, for meat for you, in other words, for food for you to eat, and for your servants, and for your maids, and your hired servants, and for your stranger that sojourns with you, and for your cattle, and for the beasts that are in your land, and shall be all of the increase thereof shall be food, meat. And you shall number unto you 7 Sabbaths of years. See, we've got 7 Sabbaths of years. Every 7th year is a Shabbat rest. And the land is supposed to not work. You're not supposed to be reaping and sowing and harvesting during that particular year. And so the 7 Sabbaths of rests for the land, you shall count out for you, and on the 49th year, which will be the 7th Sabbath of years, then, let me go back up a little here. So the space of 7 Sabbaths of years, 9 and 40 years. So that's 49 years. Just like counting the Feast of Shavuot. We count 7 Sabbaths, and that's 49 days. And the next day is the 50th year. That's the Feast of Shavuot.
Oh, sorry. 7 Sabbaths from the month where it was.
From the time you start counting the rest years, 7 Sabbaths from that time. Each year has another Sabbath rest. And so you count 7 of those years where you've rested your planting and harvesting. And then the 7th Sabbath would be 49th year, and the 50th year is the year of Jubilee. And it says here in verse 9, it says, in the day of atonement, you shall make the trumpet, the shofar, through all of your lands. And you shall hallow the year, the 50th year, it shall be holy. And proclaim liberty throughout all the land and to all the inhabitants thereof. A jubilee it shall be unto you. And ye shall return every man unto his possession. So if he's been sold into slavery because of hard times or whatever, then he's to be restored his land. He has to be returned to his land. Doesn't that sound like a wonderful and merciful thing to do to someone who's had horrible times come upon them?
Well, the Jubilee starts during that time where we're around the time of the Day of Atonement, right?
Right.
That's not going to be September.
Sometime in September.
Yeah.
Different years, different dates. Verse 11, a jubilee shall be that year. The 50th it shall be unto you, and not sow or reap in it that which grows of itself, or gather the vine undressed. because the Jubilee it is holy, it shall be unto you. Out of, you shall eat out of the field the increase of it, and the year of Jubilee, this Jubilee ye shall return every man to his possession. So if he has sold land because he was broke and had to pay off some bills or whatever, then in the 50th year, it was mandatory that everybody returns that land that belonged to their neighbor back to restore to him his land. Don't you wish they had something like that today? Well, there's a lot of people would be getting their land back, wouldn't they? Verse 14, according to the number of the years after the Jubilee, ye shall buy from your neighbor, and according to the years of the fruits he shall sell to you. According to the multitude of the years you shall increase the price of it, and according to the fewness of the years you shall diminish the price of it. For the number of
Crops.
where did I go?
16.
15 or 16?
16.
Okay, let me just go down there. According to the multitude of years you shall increase the price, and the fewness of years you shall diminish it, the price of it, for the number of the years, the fruits he does sell unto you. And then in 17, not ye shall oppress one another. In other words, if you're rich and you come and buy your neighbor's field, you're not supposed to oppress him. You know people that have been oppressed when they've had to sell land. But you shall fear Yahweh. You shall fear Elohecha, your God, because I am Yahweh, your God. Wherefore ye shall do my statutes and my judgments, and keep and do them, and ye shall dwell in the land in safety. The land will yield her fruits, and he shall eat your fill. You shall eat your fill, and dwell in the land in safety.
I like that, in safety.
Yeah. And if you say, what shall we eat in the 7th year? Behold, we shall not sow, nor gather in our increase. I will command my blessings upon you in the 6th year, and it shall bring forth fruit for 3.
Wow.
Wow, that's wild, isn't it? And you will sow. Zerah is the root, means to. It means the seed of the crops that you want to produce. And you will sow in the 8th year and eat of the fruit of the old until the 9th year, until the 9th year's fruits come in, and you shall eat of the old. So God's going to take care of us. The land shall not be sold forever, for this is my land. For strangers and sojourners are you with me. You're strangers and sojourners with Yahweh. 24, and every or all of the land, your possessions and redemption ye shall grant for the land. Because Yamuk means to be become very poor, your brother, and has sold away his possessions and come to redeem it. If any of his kin, then shall he redeem that was sold to his brother. And the man, if none of I'm going to get into the English here. Complete Jewish Bible. And I'll get this bigger. Okay. If the seller has no one to redeem it but becomes rich enough to redeem it himself, he will calculate the number of years the land was sold for the refund the excess to his buyer and return his property. If he hasn't sufficient means to get it back himself, then what he sold will remain in the hands of the buyer until the year of Jubilee, Yovel, Jubilee. And in the Yovel, the buyer will vacate it and the seller return to his property. If someone dwells in a walled-in city, he has 1 year after the date of the sale in which to redeem it. If a full year, he will have the right of redemption. But if he has not redeemed the dwelling in the walled city within the year, then the title and perpetuity passes on to the buyer through all of his generations. It will not revert in the Yovel. So he's given a lot of different rules here for what kinds of lands are included with the year of Jubilee and which ones are not. The cities of the Levites and the houses in the cities they possess, the Levim are to have a permanent right of redemption. If someone purchases a house from one of the Levim, then the house is sold in the city where he owns property will still revert to him in the Jubilee, because the houses of the cities of the Levims are their tribe's possession among the people of Israel. The fields in the open land around their cities may not be sold because that is their permanent possession. If a member of your people becomes poor so that he can't support himself among you, you are to assist him as you would a foreigner or a temporary resident, so that he can continue to live with you. Do not take interest when you loan him money, or take profit when you sell him food. I am Yahweh your God. I brought you out of the land of Egypt in order to give you the land of Canaan and be your God. If a member of your people has become poor among you and sells himself to you as a slave, in other words, do not make him do the work of a slave. Rather, you are to treat him like an employee or a tenant. He will work for you until the year of Jubilee, and then he will leave you, and he and his children with him, and return to his own family and regain possession of his ancestral lands. For they are my slaves whom I brought out of Egypt. Therefore, they are not to be sold as slaves. Do not treat them harshly, but fear your God. Concerning the men and women you may have as slaves, you are to buy men and women slaves from the nations around you. You may also buy the children of foreigners living with you and members of their families born in your land. You may own these. You may also bequeath them to your children to own. From these groups you may take your slaves forever, but as far as your brothers, the people of Israel, are concerned, you are not to treat each other harshly. If a foreigner living with you has grown rich, and as a member of your family has become poor and sells himself to this foreigner, leaving you with you or to a member of the foreigner's family, he may redeem after he has been sold. One of his brothers may redeem him, or his uncle or his uncle's sons may redeem him, or any near relative of his may redeem him. If he becomes rich, he may redeem himself. If he will calculate with the person who bought him the time from the year he sold himself to the year of Jubilee, and the amount to be paid will be according to the number of years in his time as an employee at an employee's wage. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of give you a little overview of what's going on in the Torah. This Torah Parashat concludes with You are not to make yourselves any idols, erect a carved statue or a standing stone, or place any carved stone anywhere in your land in order to bow down to it. I am Yahweh, your God. But what if you're using it for another reason? What if you own this big piece of land and there has been a big stone on the property that was carved out in a special shape so that you could carry a small replica of that big stone in your pocket and prove that that's your land? It's like owning a deed in trust. So if you're not bowing down to them to worship them, they could be used for this purpose without breaking God's laws. And remember Laban and how Rebecca and Leah and Rachel. Anyway, when they left their father's house, Rebecca stole her father's idols. Well, she was taking his identity as the owner of that land. And that's why he was so desperate to get it back when he was chasing after her. Isn't that interesting?
Oh, that was Rachel, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was Rachel. Rebecca was for Isaac, yeah. Okay, well, that's all we're going to take the time for tonight. I hope you got something good out of this study. And we're going to also include the next Parsha this weekend. Parsha 33, Behukotai. By my regulations in the years. Anyway, that's it for tonight.
Robert, she has a question.
Okay.
So how would you convince someone that Sunday is not their official holiday or Sabbath day?
When they're not looking, go out and work in it. And say, if God didn't change this to Sunday, then if he changed it to Sunday, then he'll kill me, and if he didn't, then you'll die. No. I'm playing.
Rabbi.
Yeah.
Well,
A bit more and more.
the way I was able to take and talk to people about it easiest is ask the question, where did God uncommand the day to be?
Did he command the day?
When did he?
Where did he uncommand it? Exactly.
Where's the counter command?
Chapter and verse, please. And then they'll probably take you over to where Paul was talking about something about special days, setting up special days and whatnot. But it doesn't say Sabbath in there anywhere.
And it doesn't say anything about the first day of the week.
Right.
The only time it says about the first day is in Genesis 2. Well, in a way it does.
Well, because she's saying that Jesus rose on Sunday.
Chapter and verse.
But like in Genesis, it says that, how God created the earth in 6 days, and the seventh day he rested. And also, he also identifies that the days begin from the evening to evening.
There's sunset to sunset. Yeshua didn't. There's nothing in the Bible that says he was raised on Sunday. There's nothing in the Bible that says he was raised on Sunday. So he was crucified on the eve of Pesach, Passover.
Rabbi has a wonderful teaching.
Actually, yeah, Rabbi does have teachings on issues. I would say more Saturday, because he died on the eve of Passover. He died before Passover. It had to be done before Passover. Passover always came around March, April.
Turn to Colossians chapter 2:16.
Colossians what?
Chapter 2.
Okay.
I wanted to go down to about verse 16. Okay, verse 16 says, "Let no one judge you in food or drink, or regarding a festival, or new moons, or Sabbaths." First of all, let's get the right context in the mindset. Let no one else judge you in food or in drink, or regarding a festival, a new moon, or Sabbath. You being someone who's practicing these things. Now, who would judge you in your keeping of the Sabbath? Would the world judge you in it? Not really. The world doesn't care if you keep the Sabbath or not. They don't believe in God. So who would believe in God and object to you keeping the Sabbath?
Somebody who says they're following the ways of God.
Conventional rabbinic Judaism cares. And they try to tell you, oh, you don't keep the Sabbath because you didn't light candles before the Sabbath started. You don't keep the Sabbath. You dusted your house on Saturday. You don't keep the Sabbath. They just find little nitpicking ways to just tell you that you're not doing it right. It's none of their business. That's between you and God. You see what I'm saying? So, yeah, the religious community is the one that'll get all upset if you try to keep the Sabbath. You don't do it our way, so therefore you're wrong. Is that helpful? Each one of these items here, God is the one that commands festivals. God is the one that commanded us to observe the new moons. God is the one that commanded us to keep the Shabbat. And so if we're doing it, the only ones who are going to be complaining is the ones that think that they're holier than you are, and they want you to honor and worship them. That's against the Torah. Is that helpful? It says these things are a shadow of things to come, but the substance is of the Messiah. Let no one cheat you of your reward, taking delight in false humility and worshiping of angels, and intruding into those things which he has not seen, vainly puffed up by his fleshly mind. That's what I'm talking about right there. And not holding fast to the head, from which all the body is nourished and knit together by joints and ligaments, and grows in the increase that is from God. You like that, huh? Yep. Well, if there's no more comments or questions, I'd like to shut her down. I'm tired. I've been going all day long. like to encourage all of you to come and worship with us on Shabbat. If you can't come here in person, then just come here online, and we'll feel your presence as you pray for us and we pray for you. Hallelujah. And we also will have another Bible study next Tuesday night. And everybody's welcome.
Thank you for joining us for another delightful Torah study. Remember that we have our weekly Shabbat, Saturday morning services beginning at 10 a.m. for our Bible's Issues class, followed by our 11 a.m. main service with worship, liturgy, and another teaching. We shall see you again, and Shalom, Shalom.